today we're going to speak about a more recent history, a history that most of us have lived and are currently living. Today, we will use history as a mirror to look into the future and predict what lies ahead as we crawl into the second decade of the 21st century. According to the 1981 National Health and Nutrition Survey for Barbados, 29% of children under 5 were at that time malnourished. The survey observes that this level represented a decrease in the level of malnutrition in preschool children as compared to earlier estimates. In fact, the 1975 data shows that in the same age group, 39% of children were classified as malnourished. In the same 1981 National Health and Nutrition Survey, 20% of female adolescents aged 10 to 19 were classified as either being overweight or obese. So the picture, less than 35 years ago, was of a population where a third of the children were malnourished and a fifth of female adolescents were overweight. As we moved into the 21st century, by 2010, the prevalence of overweight and obesity rose to 32% in boys and 37% in girls. And only 10 years later, in 2011, the WHO's Global School-Based Student Health Survey showed that under 5% of 13 to 15-year-olds were underweight, but 46% were either overweight or obese. And boys and girls had similar statistics, so it wasn't anything to do with gender. So in the period of 35 years, or one generation, Barbados has moved from an island where a third of the children are malnourished to almost 4 in every 10 adolescents being overweight or obese. The same trend has also been seen in adults, with the mean body mass index of adult females moving from just over 26 in 1980, and 26 means that they're just overweight, to just under 30 in 2008, which means that the average Barbadian woman in 2008 was obese. Men followed similar patterns. And in 1980, the average BMI for men was 24, which had put men then in the healthy weight range. But this moved to 27, which put them in the overweight range by 2008. Again, that meant in 2008, the average male Barbadian was overweight. This has translated in over 74% of females and 57% of males being either overweight or obese in the national study that was conducted in 2011. So again, we move higher up the scale. What is the cause of this? What are the drivers that have made this happen? And what are the consequences of this transition? Some of the driving forces behind the changes in nutrition status from undernutrition to obesity can be attributed to globalization. To varying extents, urbanization, advanced communications, the rapid technological advancements have altered our personal and national lifestyles, which have changed the types of foods available, the types of foods purchased, the type of foods consumed, including the ready-prepared, high-fat, high sugar foods. Looking at the data on energy intake in Barbados, from 1965 to 2000, there has been an increase of approximately 400 calories per day per person. Now, people in the audience might say, what is 400 calories? I had a quick look, and that's the equivalent of a leg and thigh of chicken roasted with the skin on. So every day we're eating an extra chicken and leg with the skin on. That was from 65 to 2000. Now this in itself is worrying because the daily energy intake in 1965 was already around 2,600 calories, which is above the recommended average intake for healthy living, as WHO estimates say that we should consume between 2,000 to 2,400 calories per day. So in 1965, there was already the start of this increase in calorie intake. When we look at the 2000 data, this shows that the average adult in Barbados was consuming over 3,000 calories per day, or between 600 to 1,000 calories per day more than the recommended. Now, going back to the chicken leg and thigh, that means 2 to 3 extra chicken leg and thigh per day, per person, roasted with the skin on. So this in itself is worrying. But we know that energy intake is made up of different components of the food. There are those components that are important for muscle build and repair, those that provide us energy to be active, and others that help us to lead a healthy life. But what has happened over the 35 years I have mentioned is that the contribution of fat in the diet has moved from 22%, or just under 600 calories, in 1965, to 29%, from 22 to 29%. Or if we look at it in calories, from just under 600 calories to just under 900 calories in 2000. This means that 300 of those 400 extra calories that I mentioned we've added between 1965 to 2000 have come from fat. So the extra that we've added, it wasn't really 2 extra chicken legs and thigh, but was a huge dose of fat. The story gets worse because more recent studies in 2005 show that although the total energy intake was almost identical to that from the Barbados food consumption study of 2000, but the percentage energy from fat went even higher. And it went as high as 5% more than it was in 2000. So the 29% was added even more. Now, how has this happened? Have we really changed our cooking and eating habits that much and that quickly? Well, the Barbados Food and Consumption Survey of 2000 shows another disturbing piece of data. 45% of men and 31% of women said that they regularly purchased ready-to-eat meals. And this figure was even higher in the younger age group. So a third of women and almost half of men say they purchased ready-to-eat meals. That in itself is a worrying statistic. But 47% of younger men aged under 30 consumed ready-to-eat meals 3 or more times per week. So out of the 7 days of the week, half of the men were consuming a ready-to-eat meal. Now you might say to me, there's ready-to-eat meals and there's ready-to-eat meals. Not all ready-to-eat meals need to be blamed for the problem. But not surprisingly, nearly 54% of men and 44% of women less than the age of 30 obtain these ready-to-eat meals at a fast food outlet, at least once a week. So there is one of the changes. The 2005 dietary pattern study also showed that sugar intake exceeded the Caribbean recommendation by almost fourfold, 4 times the recommended sugar intake. Now again, I've heard it said, we're born with our tongue in the sugar because we're Bayesian. But the majority of that fourfold sugar intake is from sugar-sweetened drinks and juices, which provided over 40% of the total sugar intake. This was a study done with adults. But the problem is that with teens, the situation is no better. In 2011, the Global School Health Survey showed that over 73% of students usually drink a carbonated soft drink 1 or more times a day. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you how many teaspoons of sugar are in a carbonated soft drink. So we know that we're eating too much and we're eating the wrong foods. But obesity is the result of excess energy in the body. So if we use the energy, we shouldn't have a problem. And here lies the second cause of the transition. In 1995, Barbados had a total of 55,000 vehicles on the island, of which just under 43,000 were private vehicles. So 45,000 vehicles in 1995. Move the clock by a decade, by 10 years, and in 2005, that number doubled. In 2005, there were 116,000 vehicles on the road, of which just under 95,000 were private vehicles. So between 1995 and 2005, the number of private vehicles in Barbados doubled. According to the World Bank, in 2007, there were 469 motor vehicles per 1,000 people living in Barbados. And that's 1,000 people living in Barbados, not 1,000 adults. And out of those 1,000 people, 4,069 had a motor vehicle. This was the highest of all the Caribbean. We always talk about Trinidad as having traffic congestions, and you see pictures on the press. But they came second to Barbados. 353 per 1,000. So we have in Barbados 100 more cars per 1,000 population than Trinidad has. And guess what? Denmark has only 11 more cars per 1,000 population than us. And the UK, only 50 more than us. So the UK in the 2007 World Bank survey, had 520 vehicles per 1,000 people. And we, in little Barbados, had 469. So when did it all change? What Professor Lands didn't say in the opening remarks was that I first visited Barbados as a young intern at QEH in the mid-80s. And he mentioned that I was born in Malta. So coming from Malta, and I can't be proud with this statistic, a country that has 709 cars per 1,000 population. It's the 8th in the world, but also has the highest rate of childhood obesity in the European Union. So maybe there is some kind of link, more cars, more obese children. But when I came in the mid-80s, I was struck by the low number of motor vehicles on the road and how easy it was to walk from QEH to Bridgetown and also to other parts of St. Michael and Christchurch. When I came back to the Caribbean in 2001, it was one of the things that really shocked me at the change and how a simple walk from QEH was now a life-threatening venture. And when I came back in July of last year, I realized that things have not gotten any better. If anything, it's a doubly life-threatening venture. So data from the Central Bank of Barbados shows that while in 1994, just over 1,500 vehicles were imported, this increased to 8,000 vehicles in 1998. In just 4 years, the number of vehicles imported moved from 1,500 to 8,000. And this average has maintained of about 5,000 vehicles per annum if you take an average between 1998 and now. The effect of all this is that in 2007, the data from WHO shows that over 51% of adults in Barbados did not meet the WHO recommendations for physical activity. And this goes to 60% if you just look at females. The data is no better for our adolescents, with the school-based survey in 2011 showing that only a third of students were meeting the recommendations for physical activity. So 2/3 of our adolescents were not meeting the recommendations for physical activity. I ask you in the audience, how many of you were driven to school in your parents' car? But in one generation, how many of you drive your children or your grandchildren to school now? And that is where the transition has happened. So we are eating more, and we are exercising less. And this is what history, or at least the data from the studies, has shown us. So what are the consequences that we face? And here, as I promised at the start, I will also try to use history as a mirror for the future. The direct consequences of an increased energy balance and obesity prevalence has been a dramatic increase in non-communicable diseases. We're speaking here of cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and the chronic respiratory diseases. Today, 84% of total deaths in Barbados are attributed to these diseases. The latest WHO data shows that there is a 14% probability of dying between the ages of 30 and 70 from these four main non-communicable diseases. This means that 14 out of every 100 people living in Barbados aged 30 to 70 will die from NCDs and therefore will not reach their 70th birthday. 14 out of every 100 of the productive adult population of this country will not see their 70th birthday. Now, I know you may say, have you not seen the papers lately? The last few weeks, almost every day, we celebrate a new centenarian. Barbados people are made of good stock. We last long. And I say, yes, I do see the papers. But again, this is going to another generational change. Will our children see so many centenarians when they are our age? The centenarians, and here I salute all those who celebrated this milestone and who have contributed so much to the development of Barbados, are not the people that will move development forward, though. They have done their job. They now enjoy the fruits of their labor. The continued development of this country depends on those who are of productive age. The group that are dying prematurely from NCDs. It is this group that has the highest rate of disability from NCDs. It is this group that we need to continue the development of the country. The Barbados Health of the Nation survey shows that 21% of women and 16% of men have diabetes. 44% of women and 37% of men have hypertension. And 46% of women and 60% of men have a total to HDL cholesterol ratio of 5 or greater, which means an elevated ratio. In 2012, WHO stated that amongst women in the world, Barbados has the highest cancer burden attributed to overweight and obesity. It is 4 times the average of the globe. The WHO study also shows that a quarter of all cancers attributable to overweight and obesity could have been prevented if the population had a BMI, a body mass index, of what we had 30 years ago. So as I said to you, women were not obese, and men were not overweight. That could have saved a quarter of all cancers. These are alarming statistics. This is the consequence of the obesity problem. This is the consequence of our overeating, of our unbalanced diet, and of the physical inactivity. If I use this history as a mirror to see the future doesn't look good. The ravaging effects of NCDs are not only killing the motor of productivity, but are disabling society from moving forward. NCDs do not only kill, but they can kill slowly, and in so doing, disable those people who are productive and who are needed in society. They not only affect the person, but they affect the whole family and society at large. Think of a breadwinner of a family who now has to be hooked to a dialysis machine 2 or 3 times a week. I will not even start to tell you how much that costs the Ministry of Health to make sure that the treatment is given to the best of their ability. I ask you to think how that family dynamic changes. When the breadwinner is no longer able to work full-time, when that breadwinner is so tired and sick that they cannot get themselves to the dialysis unit and need another family member to assist them. I ask you to think how the dynamic of that family changes when they have to make structural changes to the house to accommodate the person who has suffered a stroke. I ask you to think how the dynamic of the family changes when that young adult starts to become blind as a consequence of NCDs. I ask you to think how the dynamic of that family changes when a family member loses a limb as a consequence of NCDs. And then I ask you to think of how the dynamic of the whole society, close and far, changes as the disabilities of NCDs hit us. As more and more people in the productive years get struck with a disability due to NCDs, the whole of society will have to change. And as I said, this is the age group that is the motor of the economy. This is the age group that has the creative minds. This is the age group that has the intellectual capacity to keep Barbados in the forefront of development. If we lose this, we lose our developmental edge. If we lose this, we lose our ability to remain competitive in the world. If we lose this, we lose the ability to be where decisions are taken and no longer lead, but have to be led. But all is not bleak. And when I look at the mirror of history, I see that the people of Barbados have always been resilient and resourceful. And that is what is happening. Much has already been done to mobilize the political agenda. And here I don't just mean the politicians who sit in parliament. We have an active and resourceful civil society who, in tandem with the political class, has moved the agenda of NCDs, prevention and management. Barbados is one of the few countries in the Caribbean, and in fact in the world, that has a strategic plan for the prevention and control of NCDs. It is also one of the few countries that has a National Commission for NCDs, which has representatives from government, civil society, faith-based organizations, the trade unions, and the private sector. But we now need to move from policy to action. When it comes to management of NCDs, the Barbados Health of the Nation showed that although 1 in 3 women are on treatment for hypertension, there's another 1 in 10 who are hypertensive but don't receive any treatment, either because they don't know or because they don't know what to do. And 1 in 5 men are also in the same situation. So we need to get better in screening. We need to get better in identifying the people at risk. And we need to get better at ensuring that everybody receives the due treatment. But treatment is one side of the story. Because if we just mop the floor and we don't stop the water from the tap running, we will still get flooded. And we need to close the tap. And to close the tap, we need to work harder on the prevention of NCDs. We need to reduce the total calorie intake of the population and increase the activity level of all the people living in Barbados. We need to protect our children from obesity. The global increase in obesity has been described by The Lancet in 2011 as a normal response by normal people to an abnormal environment. So people cannot change unless there is an enabling environment which surrounds them and enables them to make the healthy choices. The healthy choices need to be the easy choices. And although it is ultimately the individual behavior that needs to change, but the environment we live in is influenced by government, by schools, by food producers, by retailers, and all those who, through their actions, make the healthy choices either more difficult or more easy to achieve. Looking at the mirror of history, I see 3 things that affect our dietary intake. The first, high intake of sweetened juices and sugar-carbonated drinks. These could easily be replaced by fresh, unsweetened juices and other sugar-free drinks. But to see this change, we need to have an enabling environment. I would like to see all school children being able to drink water at school, to be able to go into a restaurant and have the economic choice available, which means that the cost of water or unsweetened juice and unsweetened drinks become cheaper than the carbonated sugary drinks. I would like to see our vendors, be they at schools, around schools, at workplaces, by the sea, in the coming crop over season, I would like to see them have available healthy, sugar-free drinks, which are also sold at a cheaper price than the sugar-carbonated drinks. Because the fact that the healthy option is available is only one first part of the step to an enabling environment. Ensuring that the healthy option is the more affordable option is the only way that we ensure that the whole healthy choice becomes the easiest choice. The second thing I see is replacing the most common source of fat with lower fat alternatives. We can easily make Barbados a trans fat-free island. We import all our trans fats, and they are not naturally available. They are manufactured fats. They are used in the processing of foods. We don't need them, and they are one of the major causes of NCDs in the world. Making Barbados the first trans fat-free island in the Caribbean will not only be a huge achievement in the prevention of the population against NCDs, but will also give a signal to the Caribbean and to the world that the whole of society in Barbados, the government, civil society, and the private sector are all in this fight together. Thirdly, reducing the salt intake of our population. Salt is a major contributor to hypertension, and all processed foods tend to have a high salt content. Let us start with ourselves. Let us all tonight agree that we will not add salt at the table. We don't need it. Let us all take a look at the mirror of history and see the amputations, see the strokes, see the young men and women who die as a consequence of high blood pressure. And as we look at the mirror of history, let us look at the future and see a Barbados consuming less salt in the diet. Let us work together, again, government, the private sector, civil society, to make Barbados a country where the food we eat tastes good because of its natural flavorings, the good, beautiful Caribbean flavors, and not because of the added salt. Finally, we need to exercise more. My appeal tonight to all the parents, please let your children be active. Physical education at school is not a waste of time. And as we enter the exam time for our academic year, I ask you all parents to allow your children to exercise an hour a day. This is not lost time, but it is time for them to refresh their brain and to refresh their body. And it is important for their health, for a healthy adult. In conclusion, I hope that I have been able to fulfill my task and contribute meaningfully to this year's lecture series of distemper, diagnosis and development, the provision of medical services in Barbados. And I leave you with a final thought as we traverse from celebrating Heroes Day to Labor Day. We need to act. We need to act now, as obesity and its consequences will reverse all the hard work done by previous generations to bring Barbados to the level of development it enjoys today. Thank you.